last thing we need is the b, what's attached to the x, and that is based off our period. The period is how long it takes for this graph to repeat. So after what point in time does it start repeating? 4 pi. You find the period by doing 2 pi, normal period, divided by b, the coefficient of x. So when I did 2 pi over b, we got 4 pi for a. So if I want to solve this thing for b, multiply over the b, divide by 4 pi, and b is 1/2. So it's -2 cosine of 1/2 x. That's the equation for our graph. For you guys to try. So take a second and see if you can figure out the equation for this one. Is this sine or cosine? Sine. Is this one flipped or anything? What is our amplitude? 4, so it's a 4 sine. Okay, the period of this graph. Careful, I graphed it all the way to 2 pi, but the period is just how long it takes to repeat. After pi, it does the exact same thing over again. So our period is just pi. So that means 2 pi over b equals pi. Divided by pi. And your b is 2. So it's 4 sine of 2x. That's all we have left to finish from section 1. So now you can do those last 2 homework problems. Are there any questions about that? I want to go ahead and teach section 2 now. So we are going to talk about transformations of our graphs. So same beginning pieces. We still have our amplitude, period, and count by. But what's happening now is we may be moving our graph up and down or left and right. Easiest way to learn this is just to start with an example. If you think about transformations before, if you add something to your x, what does it do? Moves the graph to the left. So this graph is going to be shifted to the left. Now, I've found that if I just tell people to shift to the left, they get really confused on all their points, especially by the time you find all of your points on your x-axis, then you have to move all 4 or all 5 of those points left, and so it makes a lot of extra work. So we are going to approach this a little bit differently. We're going to go through and still do the amplitude, period, and count by, but I'm going to add one more piece to it called an interval. What is the amplitude here? 1. Period is 2 pi divided by the number multiplied with x, which is just a 1. So my period is just 2 pi. How do we find the count by? Period divided by 4, which is pi over 2. So then our interval, how we're going to set this up. When you graph a normal sine graph, it starts at 0 and ends at 2 pi. We're going to start with that, and then I'm going to take my argument, the thing we're evaluating our trig function at, and we're going to put that on the inside. Now I want to solve this for x. So if you want to make the x by itself, you have to subtract 3 pi over 4. So I get negative 3 pi over 4. It's less than or equal to x. It's less than or equal. 2 pi minus 3 pi over 4 gives me a 5 pi over 4. And you guys know if you ever get confused on those, you can use a calculator. Just don't put in pi. So just 2 minus 3/4. It'll tell you 5/4. That tells me where my graph should start and stop. So I am ready to graph this thing now. Leave yourself some room in the negative direction because we are starting at a negative 3 pi over 4. So the first number in the interval is the first point you put on your x-axis. How do we get the next point? You just add your count by. We need 5 total points. And please make sure you are spacing them evenly. If I add pi over 2, so it's negative 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, or negative 3/4 plus 1/2, you should get negative pi over 4. Add pi over 2 again, you should get positive pi over 4, again evenly spaced here, plus pi over 2, 3 pi over 4. Need one more point, 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, 5 pi over 4. You notice 5 pi over 4 is where our interval was supposed to stop. So it should start and stop to match your interval. 5 total points. Now we're graphing it just like the ones before. Sine starts at its 0. My amplitude is 1, so my high point will be at 1. Low point at negative 1. So we have 0 up to 1. Don't be mistaken and think you have to put a point on the x-axis. My next x value is at pi over 4. Go down and back up. So it should look something like that. Questions there? Stand up. Amplitude? 2. And what's the negative do? Flips. Period? Yeah, it's just a 1x, so 2 pi over 1 is just 2 pi. Count by? Period divided by 4 is pi over 2. What else do I need to do? Interval. Okay. So we set it between 0 and 2 pi. And in the middle you put your argument, the x minus pi over 3. So solve for x. If you add pi over 3 to everything, you get pi over 3. It's less than or equal to x. It's less than or equal to 7 pi over 3. So my first point will be at pi over 3. And we add our count by. So pi over 3 plus pi over 2 should give you 5 pi over 6. Does everybody know how to do that on the calculator? Plus pi over 2, keep them spaced evenly, would be 8 pi over 6 or 4 pi over 3. Plus pi over 2, 11 pi over 6. Plus pi over 2, be 14 pi over 6 or 7 pi over 3, which is where we said it should end. Amplitude was 2, so high point 2, low point -2. Cosine always starts at its amplitude, but we flipped it so it will start at -2. So at pi over 3, that was the first point in my interval, will be at -2. I'm going to go to 0, up to 2, and back down. Take this one, don't draw the graph yet, but list all the information. Amplitude, period, pi, it's 2 pi divided by 2, so pi. Count by, we also need the interval here. So you're going to say 0 less than or equal to 2x minus pi is less than or equal to 2 pi. Add your pi to everything and divide by 2. So pi over 2 is less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 3 pi over 2. I did ask for 2 periods this time. So my first point is at pi over 2. That's like 90 degrees. Then we're counting by pi over 4. That's like 45 degrees. So pi over 2 plus pi over 4 should be 3 pi over 4. Plus pi over 4 is pi. Plus pi over 4 is 5 pi over 4. Plus pi over 4 is 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2. And that's where we said our first period should end. Amplitude 3/2. We're graphing cosine, so it starts at its high point. So at pi over 2, it should be at 3/2. Down to 0, down to -1, and back up. So the first period looks like this. How do I get the second period? Keep going. Add 4 more points. So keep adding your pi over 4. So that would be 7 pi over 4. 8 pi over 4 would be 2 pi. 9 pi over 4. 5 pi over 2. Just continue your path. So this is where fifth hour stopped, but I want to keep going and add one more twist to this. Okay, so the last piece that we are going to add in, if I take an equation like this, -2 plus 3 cosine 2x. Let's start just like every other. What would be the amplitude here? 3. Period. Right. 2 pi over 2 is just pi. So count by pi over 4. Do we need to set up an interval here? You can. The time you have to set up an interval, help if I spelled it right. If you have something added or subtracted to your angle, you have to set up the interval. Otherwise, it's optional. But if you're not sure, just go ahead and do it. 0 less than or equal to 2x less than or equal to 2 pi divided by 2, so 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to pi. So it tells me I am still starting at 0. I should end at pi. We have one more piece to this. What would that -2 do to my graph?
Shift it down
Okay, let's draw this. I've asked for 2 periods. We're starting at 0, so I don't have to extend in the negative direction. Okay, counting by pi over 4. So 0 is my first point. Pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 is pi over 2. 3 pi over 4. And 4 pi over 4 is just pi. That would be the first period. Do you want me to go ahead and put the 4 more points for the second one? So if I just keep adding pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4 would be 2 pi. Now here's what we're going to do. When I want you to move down, I want you to go ahead and go to -2, and we are just going to draw a dashed line there. That dashed line is going to represent the center of my graph. So we are going to be oscillating around that line now. My amplitude is 3. That means you'll either go 3 above that line, which would take you to +1, or 3 below, which would take you to -5. We're graphing cosine, which starts at its amplitude. We didn't flip, so if we're centered at -2, amplitude of 3, that means I would start at 1. Pi over 4 would be back to 0. Pi over 2, we would be at -5. Repeating the pattern. So if you move up or down, just draw a horizontal line, and then that's the line you move around. Let's do one more to make sure we've got it, and then we'll be done for today. Well, let's just do 1 period. We've done 2 periods on the last 2. Amplitude? 2. But since there's a negative in front of that 2, we are flipping on this one. Period. Mm-hmm. 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x, so 2 pi over 3. So the count by is your period divided by 4 for the 4 quadrants. We get pi over 6. Do I have to do an interval on this one?
Yes.
Yes.
How do you know if you answer that?
If your angle has anything added or subtracted, you have to do it.
So if it's just 3x, then
You don't have to. When in doubt, you can always do it. It won't hurt anything. So 0 less than or equal to 3x minus pi less than or equal to 2 pi. So if I add my pi's, divide by 3, so pi over 3 less than or equal to x less than or equal to pi. What else is happening? I can't draw a straight line. Okay. Points on the x-axis, we are starting at pi over 3, that's like 60 degrees. Adding pi over 6, which is like 30. I only asked for 1 period, so you just need the 5 points. So pi over 3 plus pi over 6 would be 3 pi over 6, or pi over 2. Plus pi over 6 would be 4 pi over 6, or 2 pi over 3. Plus pi over 6 would be 5 pi over 6. Plus pi over 6 is pi, which is where we said it should stop. We are going up 4. So I'm going to positive 4 and just drawing a dashed line. Amplitude is 2, so we will be going 2 above and 2 below that line. We're dealing with sine, which starts at 0 points, so it'll start on the dashed line. We are flipping it, so at pi over 2 it'll go down first, then back up. Questions? That's my stopping point. So, if you do not have the 4.1 homework done, you need to get that done. This is our homework from 4.2. 25 to 27, 35 to 53, every other odd. 25 and 27, you're not graphing. It just asks you in the directions to list the amplitude, period, phase shift. That's asking you for the things that we list before we graph it. So amplitude, period, count by, interval, that's what I'm wanting on those first 2. And you've got the next 20 minutes to work on all of your homework.